Do we, okay, there it goes.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters of the Cooperstown and Oneonta areas, welcome to the Candidates Forum for the New York State 121st Assembly District. My name is Leanne Hirabayashi, and I will be your moderator tonight. Joining me in running tonight's debate are League members Steve Laudner to keep track of time, Julie Sorensen to gather and organize emailed questions from the audience, and Tom Pullyblank to provide tech support as needed. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can explain a few things to you. So for those of you in our audience, if you wish to ask questions, email them to forumquestions@lwvcooperstownarea.org. This email will be visible throughout the debate on one of the screens, as you can see. Please include your name, the town you're from, and to which candidate you're addressing your question. If it's all three candidates, just write all, or we'll assume that it's for all of them. And we apologize in advance if we're not able to get to everyone's questions, and thanks so much for understanding on that. For those of you in the audience who are familiar with the Zoom platform, we have intentionally disabled Q&A chat. All your interaction on this debate will be by emailing the candidates at forumquestions@lwvcooperstownarea.org. If you're having technical issues, please send an email to forumsupport@lwvcooperstownarea.org. And then also note that this debate is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be made available on the Oneonta and Cooperstown League websites in the next day or so. Okay, so let me stop sharing. All right. This meeting has been planned and is conducted by the two League of Women Voters organizations in Otsego County, representing the Oneonta and Cooperstown areas. And this year marks 100 years that the League has empowered voters and defended democracy. Over the last century, we fought for election protection and equal access to the ballot, all while maintaining our commitment to nonpartisanship and fostering an informed electorate. Yes, the League is a nonpartisan political organization, which is a combination that can be confusing. We are nonpartisan in that we do not support or oppose political parties or candidates, and we are political in that we believe democracy is not a spectator sport, and that all citizens need to educate themselves and participate in our democracy. So when we're not engaged in organizing and hosting candidate forums like these, League members study issues and policies, come to member agreement, and then advocate based on those decisions. We've retained the name League of Women Voters because of our suffragist roots, but for well over 50 years, men have been included in our membership. The Oneonta Area League was founded in 1965, followed by the Cooperstown Area League in 1970. And we're proud to say that we are one of the few, if not only, counties in upstate New York with two leagues. Over the years, the two leagues have had a local impact on issues ranging from recycling to voting machine selection to the county administrative position and much more. Tonight, we have with us the three candidates for let me make sure I've got that right. Yep. I'm sorry. And we hope you will consider joining us. My apologies. If you're interested in joining either league, please go to our websites to find out more, and we'll have those websites at the end of our presentation here at the end of the evening. So before we begin the debate, there is one important message that the league would like to impart. So I'm going to share my screen briefly again. So you can see that. So the message basically is vote. You're here for the debate, so we know you're engaged. Here are the important dates to keep in mind. Early voting started 2 days ago, continues through Sunday, November 1. Check your County Board of Elections for these times and places. November 2 is the last day to apply in person for an absentee ballot. November 3 is I apologize, there's something wrong with the way this is presented, but November 3 is election day with polls open from 6 to 9 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's also the last day to postmark your absentee ballot or deliver it to your polling place. And for more information about voting, please go to vote411.org or the Cooperstown or Oneonta League websites, which I've listed below. Now, let me give you a brief background on the district. Tonight, as I said, we have with us the 3 candidates for the New York State 121st Assembly District. Please note that while Corey Mosher appears on the ballot, he has suspended his campaign and will therefore not be participating in tonight's forum. As described in Ballotpedia, the New York State Assembly is the lower chamber of the New York State Legislature, which, along with the New York State Senate, works with the Governor of New York to create laws and establish a state budget. Legislative authority and responsibilities of the New York State Assembly include passing bills on public policy matters, setting levels for state spending, raising and lowering taxes, and voting to uphold or override gubernatorial vetoes. There are 150 seats in the New York State Assembly, and each Assembly member represents an average of 129,187 people. To be eligible to serve in, or the Assembly members serve 2-year terms and are not subject to term limits. And to be eligible to serve in the New York State Legislature, members must be New York State residents for 5 years and residents of the district for 12 months. The 121st Assembly District includes Madison County and parts of Otsego and Oneida counties. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. All right. So the candidates in alphabetical order by last name are Dan Buttermann, Jake Cornell, and John Salka. Now, the ground rules for this evening have been reviewed in advance by our candidates. Each candidate will have 4 minutes for an opening statement, the order of which was determined by a draw. Candidates may choose not to use all 4 minutes. And then the timekeeper will hold up a sign on his screen. And timekeeper, if you can help me out with this, the timekeeper will hold up a sign on his screen when 30 seconds, and then 15 seconds, and then a stop sign when time is up. After opening statements have been made, questions for the candidates will be taken from the audience. At the end of the closing of the question period, candidates will be able to make a brief 2-minute closing statement. Again, candidates may choose not to use all 2 minutes. And we're scheduled to conclude at 8:30 p.m. So we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll start with the opening statement from John Salka.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the League of Women's Voters for their sponsoring this debate, and it's much appreciated. I've always been of the position that the more people that vote, the better participatory government we can have. I'm the 121st Assemblyman of in the New York State Assembly. I was born and brought up in Central New York, grew up in Utica, New York in the Cornell section. We've been a resident now of Brookfield for about 30 years, my wife and Erin and I. Just a little history about some of my past public service. I was a member of the Brookfield Central School Board for 7 years, where I had the honor of being the president of that board for 4 years. I then ran for Brookfield Town Supervisor, and I was elected in 2008. Now, according to charter, if you're a town supervisor in Madison County, you also serve on the County Board of Supervisors. While I was a town and county supervisor, I had the opportunity to serve on a number of committees and chair those committees. Those were social services, mental health, the Board of Health. I was chair of Planning and Economic Development, and I was also chair of the Energy Committee. I'm a small business owner for 10 years. And my profession, primary profession, is a New York State licensed registered respiratory therapist, and I've held that license for over 30 years. I was past director of an organization called the Mid-York Asthma Coalition, which was dedicated to making sure that young people with asthma were able to manage their disease, and I was very, very proud of some of the things we accomplished on that. I'm also a member of the Madison County Industrial Development Agency, and I serve as their finance chair. I was a member of the Madison County Soil and Water Conservation District, and in the Assembly, I sit on the Health, Social Services, Higher Ed, Aging, and Banks Committee. Obviously, this year is different than any other year we have ever seen. The COVID pandemic is the issue that everyone wakes up in the morning with, and goes to bed at night with. We are concentrated on this and focused like a laser to make sure that through this pandemic, people in the 121st district are given the guidance, given the navigation, and given the support that they're going to need. COVID is the #1 issue. It affects education, it affects infrastructure, it affects healthcare, it affects social programs, it affects business, and it affects many, many people in their day-to-day lives in the 121st. We've had people come into our office and call and message that are having a horrible time with unemployment. We've helped hundreds of people get their unemployment benefits. We've had people come in who are business owners, and we visited business owners throughout the district extensively. And we are very concerned about their viability. They're very concerned about their viability. So this is the #1 issue for us, is how to navigate through something that we have not seen in over 100 years. Being a health professional, being a respiratory therapist is something I'm quite familiar with, treating pulmonary diseases and managing pulmonary diseases. This is a disease like we have not seen in a long time, but it is manageable. It's manageable through science-based protocols. We've got a lot of work to do yet, but I'm convinced that we're going to beat this virus, and we're going to get our businesses, we're going to get our economy, and we're going to get our state back on track. So I'm looking forward to doing this, working on this for the next 2 years, because I think this is probably going to be one of the most important issues now and in the future. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Candidate Salka. And now the opening statement from Dan Buttermann.
First unmute, can you hear me okay? Well, I'd like to begin by saying thanks as well to the League of Women Voters for putting this event together. This is an extraordinary year we are going through, and I'm thankful that the League took the extraordinary effort to make this forum possible. It's important for the voters to see the differences, the distinctions between me and my opponents. And for that, I'm also thankful for my opponents, Jake and John, for participating as well. So I'd like to start by sharing a bit about me. My wife, Anna, and I are raising our 3 girls, proud to be doing it here in the district. We have a 1st grader, a 3rd grader, and this year a 6th grader. We broke into the middle school. It was in middle school that I started to play the clarinet, and music has shaped my life in positive ways, which I really cannot describe. And in 7th grade, we started a jazz band. My brother and I were a part of it, and it was a really exciting thing to do. The first concert was coming up, but we had a problem. We didn't have our band uniforms to perform in. It was mid-year though, and there was no budget item to purchase those uniforms. So what do? And at about the same time, the local Kiwanis Club, which my dad was a member of for many years, had just finished its annual fundraising campaign and was looking for organizations to support. And Kiwanis' mission is to support children around the world. So I asked my dad, is the jazz band something that the Kiwanis could support? And I asked my band director, do you think it'd be okay if Kiwanis bought the shirts for us? And not a month later, my band director had those shirts, had the check, and our first concert was for the weekly lunch of the Kiwanis Club. That experience has stayed with me because it felt great, making that connection between 2 entities that needed each other and could help one another. And my public service since then has been aimed at doing that, to make connections. And by creating connections that create value, we can help people. I've served on the Oneonta School Board, just finished 6 years. I've served in other ways in the community as well, from the Planning Board, also the Community Action Partnership, various chambers of commerce. And in 2017, I brought TEDx to our community. The goal of TED is to bring big ideas and people together. And it has been a fantastic success for our community. In fact, in 2019, we sold out. Now, the goal of TEDx is to connect people and ideas. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done. Now, I do not take 100% credit for the program that was created, but what I do take credit for is creating the team that made it happen. This is a skill that I offer, a strength that I have, that I offer to this position. I think it's critically important to be able to work as a team, to be able to collaborate and to cooperate with other members of the Assembly, our colleagues across upstate, Republicans, Democrats, upstate, downstate alike, to solve the massive challenges ahead of us. We have all worked in our time with people that offer complaints. They get nothing done and they're highly ineffective, and they don't get anyone to work with them. That is not what I offer. I offer solutions and I bring teamwork to play so we can work on these solutions and make them actionable. So I hope that tonight is focused on the solutions and the ideas, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Again, thank you so much. I hope you have a good talk tonight.
Thank you very much, Candidate Buttermann. And now the opening statement from Jake Cornell.
Thank you. I'd like to first thank the Women's League of Voters for having me, and to my opponents for attending this debate. We may disagree politically, but in the end, we are all New Yorkers and we want what's best for our home. At the age of 18, I had my first child, and as any good parent knows, especially young mothers, having a child so young is like getting hit in the head hard and waking up with a new perspective. When I was born 24 years ago on October 18th, 1996, my parents did everything they could to make sure I could live a better life than they did. And I suppose my tenacity to do better for my children comes from the same instinct as my school teacher mother and combat veteran father. Throughout my entire life, almost every individual in my generation of millennials was molded to believe that unless you were college educated, if you didn't get a degree in what you were passionate in, if you didn't become a police officer or join the military, or if you didn't listen to the government, you were made to feel irrelevant. In fact, the kids who wanted to be welders, carpenters, and plumbers were shuffled into study halls for the remaining 2 years of high school. And believe me, remember, I'm only 24 years old, and this is very fresh in my mind. New York State takes tens of billions from taxpayers to fill high schools with overpaid administrators, underpaid teachers, and rooms full of thousands of 11th and 12th graders who sit for 2 years before they have permission to carry on with their lives. I think that we should be sending these kids to apprenticeships, shadowing professionals in various careers to determine if a college education in that field is even worth a $60,000 college education. Or perhaps attend a trade school where you'll learn a skill and taxpayer dollars will be better spent. And you can come out of high school immediately making $20 to $30 an hour as a mechanic, carpenter, plumber, or nurse. The average blue-collar worker in New York is in their 50s, and that number should be in the mid-30s. We have forgotten that it is tradesmen that fix our cars, keep the power on, keep us warm, build our roads, and farm our food. And it was the tradesmen who gave the American economy its horsepower. But when my generation was growing up, when you saw someone wearing a hard hat, it was woven into your social fabric by the New York State public education system to pity them. The very system that has unfairly taken billions of dollars from taxpayers and has told young people for decades that the only road to success is through college education, and that most of them will have to take a lifetime of debt out to pay for. And I'm running for state assembly to work so children coming into the world today won't fall victim to the same old ball and chain. What's the point of all these multi-million-dollar programs and facilities that both Republicans and Democrats fought for and fight to keep if it has done nothing but put our children into a crushing lifetime of debt, overwhelming stress, and then leave them without skills to obtain a career that can pay even $15 an hour? You see, in a true capitalist system, not the one that we have today, but a true capitalist system, the government owes a debt to the people. In a socialist system, the people owe a debt to the government. And over the last several decades, our elected officials have had a bad habit of convincing the people to pay so the government can fix their problems for them. We must wake up and realize that it's time the government is shrunk. I outright reject the idea that we should send kids to government schools where they will learn from government teachers and train them for government tests and then send them off to government-owned colleges. This is a deadly cycle that exists not just in education, but in healthcare, our justice system, and virtually every government program that the people of New York are stolen from to pay for. I think it would be beneficial to start cutting a few administrative salaries and start selling off some government real estate that recently has become neglected in use or serves no other purpose beyond its cosmetics. And I'm sure the question of my experience will be mentioned in this debate because of my age. I am 24 after all. But the reasons my wife is able to stay home with my children, and the reason why I could start my own business, and the reason why I live independently at the age of 24 is because I know how to hunker down and look at the finances, because I care for my family's future. I think our government asks too much of its citizens without COVID-19 restrictions, and it is asking too much for our children to carry the burden of our government created in this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Candidate Cornell. And now we're going to move on to questions from the audience. Now, I stated earlier, for those of you in the audience, and we have now 77 people in the audience, which is fantastic. again, we might be hard pressed to find an in-person forum that could hold that many people safely. So this is what Zoom is all about. Those of you in the audience, if you haven't done so already, please use the email address on your screen. That's forumquestions@LWV Cooperstown area. I'm sorry, forumquestions@Cooperstown LWV area .org to send in your questions for the candidates. Now, candidates will be limited to answers not to exceed 2 minutes. They may decline to answer a question if they so choose. Candidates wishing to answer questions that aren't addressed to them may signal signal me and gain the floor for no more than 2 minutes. Now, if you've already answered the question but want to do a follow-up, you may do so for 1 minute at my discretion. Only questions pertaining to the issues will be allowed, and although controversy and differing opinions are welcome, no personal or abusive questions or comments are permitted. These individuals have put themselves before the public by running for office, and that alone is a service that must be respected. The emailed questions are being reviewed and collated, so it's possible your question may be slightly reworded if it's similar to someone else's. We are focusing laser-like on asking questions of the candidates, so if you send a statement without a question, we will likely not read it. Should you wish to express your opinion on a subject with one of the candidates, we ask you that you do so by contacting them directly. We'll get to as many questions as possible as time allows. And the order for the response to the first question was also determined by a draw, and we will be starting with Dan, and then Jake, and then John following. And that will be for the first question, and after that we'll just be rotating the order from there. So we'll start off with the first question is from MJ Colony at Treadwell, New York. This question is for all candidates, so we're going to start with Dan. Where do you stand on the issue of funding for the Catskill Regional Teacher Center?
I'm sorry, I missed that. The Catskill Regional
Teacher Center.
That is the first time I've been asked that question as far as where I stand on it. So I wouldn't be able to say yes or no to that because I haven't looked into it. So as far as supporting teachers and education, continuing education, I'd be in favor of that. So I have to leave it at that because I was not prepared to discuss that particular issue.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And now to Jake. Where do you stand on this issue of funding for the Catskill Regional Teacher Center?
This is the first time I've had this question as well. In this time of crisis, of COVID-19 and in government shutdowns and an overreaching government, we don't have the finances to give money to certain programs across the state. I haven't seen anything about this teacher center, but I'd be happy to look at the numbers, and if it's fair, and as long as it doesn't raise the tax dollars of the constituents in the 121st district, I'd consider it.
Thank you, Jake. And John?
Thanks for the question. I have toured the Catskill Regional Teacher Center, and I was very impressed by the caliber of the staff, by the facility, and by the ability of their opportunities that they are giving the students of the regional center. I can understand that money is tight, but we all know, and I learned this from my years as a school board member, that education is probably one of the most important investments that we can make, especially now when we know that a lot of children are being taught at home. Broadband is a huge issue regarding that. But after my tour of the center, I was enthused about being able to support them in any way that I can through the New York State Assembly. And I'll agree, my two opponents would also agree, I'm sure, that education is a vital investment in the young people of our communities. And that is something that I'm looking forward to actually going back and revisiting them to see what I could possibly do, again, in such trying times. We know that there are a lot of challenges out there, but there are resources. There are possibilities of being able to assist these organizations, and it's definitely money well spent.
Thank you, John. Dan, did you want to have a follow-up for a minute?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I might as well get this out of the way now. For me and John to agree on something. I completely agree that it is the most important investment in our future is education. So we may not have many agreements, but that is one in principle that I definitely want to support is education. So that's out of the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Okay. All right. And then the next question I'd like to ask is actually a question from me. Is you mentioned, John, I think you mentioned broadband, so let's go ahead and ask about that. Starting with Jake, what actions will you take to promote improving broadband in our assembly district? Jake?
Thank you for that question. The idea of a free market system is one where the government is left out of business decisions, especially for large corporations that provide internet. We're going to have a fast internet that'll be available around the world in a matter of years. This is not something that needs to come out of the taxpayer's pocket. If you look at companies like Tesla and they're operating with Starlink, and that stuff can be here, and then the future will be here within a couple of years. We don't need to burden taxpayers with paying for something that's not available when it's going to be available shortly. The free market will decide that itself.
Okay, thank you, Jake. And Dan, what actions will you take to promote improving broadband in our assembly district?
I think this is something that's critical for our future. It's important for access to healthcare. It's important for delivering education services, and it's a vehicle for making commerce work in the 21st century. And without it, we are simply left behind. Our citizens are at risk, and our future is also at stake. So as an assembly member, there are some actions, some targeted actions we can do to get access to this critical resource going forward. And this is, it comes down to finding the funding for it. It is an expensive proposition to build that kind of infrastructure, and it's going to take money to do it. And it's not feasible to expect each individual customer to come up with it on their own. If that were the case, it would just be cost prohibitive. But it is critical for our well-being to have it, so the government can participate in the development. How I would go at it is essentially finding the funding sources to make it work. It is going to be a difficult go of it in the coming years because of the financial crisis following the pandemic. As we come out of it, we need to make those targeted investments so that our region is not left behind. And this will be a combination of state and federal funding. There have been cases where this has been done, like here in Otsego with Otsego Electric, the cooperative, the member-driven organization for utilities. They started the OE Connect a few years ago and secured state and federal funding to the tune of almost $20 million to upgrade to the fiber optic network that they are attaching customers to right now. That's a very expensive proposition, and it requires collaboration with assembly members and senators upstate and downstate, but also with our federal representatives, because it takes a combination effort to make it work. And as a member of the majority, I will definitely be in a stronger position to get those resources that we need.
Thank you, Dan. And John, what actions will you take to promote improving broadband in our assembly district?
Well, it's not only what actions I will take, it's what actions I have taken. As a matter of fact, I've been a strong advocate for increased broadband funding. I've had a number of the representatives from both the utility companies and the broadband companies in my office seeking to strategize on how we can make sure that funds are assigned properly to our effort to increase broadband. And, you know, it's not just about education. There's a very, very important effort going on right now, especially given the fact that COVID is keeping so many people home, in particular our senior citizens, is to increase the capabilities of telehealth. We are doing incredible things with telehealth. We're able to address people's needs at home via physicians, nurse practitioners, and other means of making sure that their needs are taken care of. So what we need to do, all right, and this doesn't become a partisan issue. It doesn't become an issue of whether or not you have more influence in the assembly, because one thing that the COVID pandemic has done, it's leveled the playing field on how much each member of the legislature can bring home. There's very, very limited resources, and it ends up being who's going to be the squeaky wheel. And I've proven time and time again in Albany that I'm one of the squeakier wheels on the floor of the assembly. So we will get funding for that as soon as we can sift through the $16 billion deficit that Albany is presenting to us right now. So when those monies become available, when we straighten out this COVID pandemic, we're going to be right there in the front line, making sure, working with organizations like the Otsego Electric Cooperative, who I visited several times and really had some great brainstorming sessions with them. So when we do finally are able to free up resources, I'm going to be right there with a good knowledge base and the connections to be able to go forward quickly with broadband coverage.
Thank you, John. And I have a question for you from Patty McLeish of Cooperstown, New York. John, this is for you. New York State recently enacted many election law reforms, but same-day registration and no excuse absentee balloting must be passed again by the legislature. Would you support these proposals, and are there other election reforms that you support?
As a matter of fact, I did vote yes on the no excuse absentee balloting. I think it's a great way of making sure, again, in these very difficult times that we're living in, to make sure that people are kept safe, to make sure that people are able to exercise their right to vote, and to make sure it's done in a secure method. You know, I have great boards of elections in my district, I should say, both in Oneida, Otsego, and Madison County. I mean, they do a great job both on the Democratic and the Republican side. So I'm very confident our vote's going to be secure this year. The problem with what I see with same-day registration is that it doesn't have the proper vetting process that it should have. If, in fact, we can put the resources into guaranteeing that any kind of fraud would be kept to a minimal, with same-day registration, it would be something that I would be able to work with. But as I said, I did vote for no excuse absentee balloting, and I think it's working out well. We have historic numbers of people right now that have filed for absentee ballots, and I'm excited to see. Where it all ends up.
Okay, great. And let me put that question, the same question, to Dan Buttermann. If you'd like to respond, would you also like to respond to that question?
Sure, I'll be brief though. I would vote yes for the same-day registration and for the no excuse absentee request. But I'd like to take it a step further in some of the things that have already been implemented, namely early voting, to expand the access points for that. Right now, it's just basically one per county where we are, and that could be difficult for some folks to get there. My understanding is that it's not an expensive proposition to include additional sites for early voting. And so I think that would be the next step to consider to expand access for voting participation, is additional sites where more voters can get to the polls.
Okay. And Jacob, would you like to respond to that question?
Yes, I would vote yes. I would vote yes, but we also need to reform our voting process with ranked choice voting. For a lot of people, including myself, when it comes to our presidential election and local elections, we would like to vote for certain candidates. And with ranked choice voting, I think we'll have more opinions and more ideas coming into the New York State Assembly and the Senate and even the governor's office. With ranked choice voting, voters would have the opportunity to not just vote for Republican or Democrat, but vote for Libertarian and vote for Green Party. And what this state is doing to third parties right now is horrendous. They're typically for third parties, we always run into issues, whether it's legal or whether it's petitioning, and the state likes to squeeze us any way we can. And we need to make sure that third parties have equal opportunity access to the ballot every year.
Thank you very much, Jake. I have a question
Leanne,
for
can I just do a rebuttal on that, or just
a
a quick
one.
statement?
Okay, a 1 minute follow-up. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd have to disagree, respectfully disagree with Dan. Putting up more polling sites is a very expensive proposition. You have to equip them, you have to staff them. Of course, that staffing has to be trained and has to be trained on a regular basis. So if in fact the state does decide to go ahead with this, it would be appropriate that New York State fund those sites. One of the issues that I heard from all my election inspectors or election officials was that the state won't back us up with funds that are desperately needed to be able to institute some of these election policies. And if you don't have the money to do it, it's not done right. So it is, in fact, quite an expensive proposition to set up these remote sites and to go through the logistics that are needed without any supports whatsoever from the state.
Dan, you have a minute for a rebuttal if you'd like.
I'll be less than a minute, just quickly. Contrary to what Mr. Salka is saying about being very expensive, I asked the Madison County Board of Elections, and their estimation is it would be $4,500 for an additional site. So yes, it is important to find the resource for it, but I would argue the point of it being very expensive or prohibitively expensive. $4,500 is not anything to cough at, but it is not necessarily a barrier that we can't get over. It's something that we should look at very closely.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Jake, did you want to have a rebuttal as well?
Yes, even if it's $4,500, it's not worth the taxpayer's dime. We don't need to be spending money on this and that. Small expenses add up. And during this pandemic, we're going to be lucky if we can get out unscathed. We can't be spending $4,500 here, $4,500 there on election sites. It's irresponsible spending.
Okay, and thank you, Jake. All right, our next question is about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering allows politicians to choose their constituents rather than having constituents choose their representatives. Processes have been developed to allow for representative districts to be drawn to maximize representation. If elected, or if you continue to hold office, one or the other, will you commit to having an independent, nonpartisan body draw districts so all residents have equal representation? And we'll start with John.
Of course I would. As a matter of fact, this was an issue that was debated extensively on the floor of the Assembly about how we're going to go about with redistricting. And just a little brief lesson on it. The redistricting basically depends on the results of the census. We know that the census was held up this year because of the pandemic, and some of the results might end up getting delayed. And this is crucial data that we're going to need in order to properly set up district lines so that the proper representation can be made. There were several bills that came up that, again, like I said, were debated. We thought that the wording on some of those bills was somewhat unfair, did not give the proper control of how those district lines are drawn to the people that were impartial enough to make the proper decisions. So gerrymandering has been a problem for a long, long time throughout this country, and it's not a fair way of doing things. It's not a representative way of having government. And if there was, and will be, I hope, bills that come up before us to be debated and decided on that level the playing field, that give a good, fair way of drawing district lines, I would be in full support of that. I haven't seen anything like that yet, though.
Thank you. And let's have Jake. What's your response to that?
I agree with Assemblyman Salka. I think that an independent agency drawing the district lines for every candidate is a fantastic idea. I don't think that that's something that should be left up to government. I think that should be left up to the people, and having an independent organization or independent group of people doing so is just a wonderful idea. And I would gladly vote yes on that.
Thank you. Dan?
I don't have anything to add. I would just to answer the question. I would support the independent commission to draw the lines to make sure all districts are competitive and fair.
Great. Thank you, Dan. All right. I have a question from John Nichols of Oneida, New York, for all candidates. We are seeing support law enforcement signs everywhere. We also see competing Black Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter demonstrations. This national election has divided even our local communities. How do you see yourself working towards unity? And we'll start with Dan.
It's an important topic. In addition to COVID-19 gripping our attention, the Black Lives Matter movement has also gripped it. And from it, we'll also talk about police agencies and protocols and practices that need to be updated. And what I don't like about the public discussion on this is it has to be one or the other. I think you can support police at the same time also support the reforms that are needed. And I think there are some positive actions in this direction to try to ensure that there's trust between police and agencies and the communities that they serve. And the governor had signed an executive order back in June. And it's to be seen how well this works out. But the idea being that there should be some community involvement to look at the protocols and laws and ordinances in place in your community for which there's an agency, a police agency in charge, and make sure that they are in line with what the community expects and needs. And then to come up with some sort of a resolution or a law by next year. This may not be a perfect resolution to the issue, but it's definitely a step in the right direction as far as taking protests and taking civil action and taking it into the legislative process on a local level and also on a state level. I think it's a good step because it helps provide expectations and clarities between law enforcement and the citizens in the areas that they serve. So I'm excited to see how that turns out in April. I don't have a judgment as far as if it's a good idea in its conclusion, but I think it's the right way to take it as far as you have protests and then you work as far as how you can take legislative action to make some real lasting change.
John, how do you see yourself working toward unity in light of the protests and the way that the national election has divided our local communities?
Well, first, and we've heard it said time and time again that we are a nation of laws. And peaceful protest is a wonderful thing. It's what this democracy was built on. Every system has its imperfections, and we have every right and actually obligation to make sure that we bring those shortfalls, if you will, to light. The community policing concept, which has been talked about for a long time, hopefully this discussion is going to give more impetus to making sure we get that community policing concept incorporated into our neighborhoods, especially our poor neighborhoods. You know, we have an issue in this country, and we have one of the highest incarceration rates in the world, and that's just wrong. But what we're doing is we typically do is we treat the symptoms. We don't treat the cause, the real cause. And the real cause of that high incarceration rate is poor communities, poor schools, no jobs being made available, no dignity being offered to the people in the poorest parts of our country. We need to address that. And that's a long-range goal. We can talk about, like I said, community policing. We can talk about the governor's executive order. I've seen it. I've talked to many police chiefs, and they just kind of shake their head at it and realize that it's a hollow attempt to try to make changes that they all agree are needed. Look, every cop hates a bad cop, and we want to minimize the number of police officers who don't play by the rules. But it's so important for us to address the problems, what I call the root cause of what is bothering, what's troubling our society right now, and it's a high incarceration rate, and unfortunately it happens in our poor, in our Black, and our brown communities. We've got a lot of work to do with that.
Thank you, John. And Jacob.
I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. I love cops. I think Oneida, the city I live, is full of great cops. But I think our good cops should be our only cops. Several of my close friends are in law enforcement, but if they wrongfully arrested or assaulted you, you should have the right to sue them. And if, God forbid, mistakes were made and you lost a loved one because a police officer made a mistake, they should be in jail. This is why I think New York should take steps to end qualified immunity, which protects police officers from lawsuits brought forth by citizens. Citizens should be able to hold police officers accountable when they do something wrong, and any qualified immunity would be able to do that. But it's not just that, it's marijuana. One of the largest reasons why people are in prison is because we have demonized a plant for the good portion of the last 100 years. If we legalize marijuana or decriminalize it, better yet, treat it like a plant, as long as it doesn't fall into the hands of a minor, you'll see a big reduction in the amount of people who are in our prisons in New York State.
Thank you, Jake. And Dan, you would like to do a follow-up? Go ahead.
Sure. I don't want to take direct issue with Mr. Salka said, but I look at it a little bit differently. He had said that the root cause is poor neighborhoods and lack of jobs and things. And there's a really interesting man that I just admire very much, Brian Stevenson, who came to SUNY Oneonta about 2 years ago. And he's spent his life on protecting those that have been wrongfully convicted. And he said, looking at crime rates over the last 50 years, the uptick in incarceration is, in his words, the misguided war on drugs. And I think that speaks to the core issue as far as what we demonize as far as how we throw people in jail for drug charges, that a few years before that would not have happened. And so I look at the root cause as far as the legislative affairs and what we've taken as a stand on how we treat drug addiction and drug possession. And so I know that's a conversation we may have tonight, but in going forward, I want to focus on that a bit too.
Thank you. John, you would like to do a follow-up?
And in some respects, I agree with Dan partially, but if you look at why they go down the path of drug abuse, and I'm talking hard drugs here, heroin, cocaine, crack, it's because these poor communities are breeding grounds for this type of the despondency that people turn to in order to comfort themselves, in order to make money. If you get good job programs, good schools, and I believe in school choice. If a school is bad, a parent shouldn't be forced to send their child there. But if you give them good, solid basis of feeling good about themselves, making sure that they have a good future in front of them, I don't think we have to. I think that'll do a world of good for people that feel that they have no other choice.
Thank you, John. And Jacob, would you like to follow up as well?
Yes. Calling poor communities a breeding ground for crime is something I disagree with. I think that I agree with John in the sense that it is government's fault for intervening with for these communities too much restrictions. Parents should have the option of school choice. But Dan is right. I do agree. We should be decriminalizing drugs. We shouldn't be putting people in jail for small levels of drugs. To be quite honest with you, government should not be concerned with what people do within the comfort of their own home. We should not be going after drug users. We should be going after drug dealers. And the best way to do that is to expose, let the drug dealers stick out like sore thumbs, decriminalize drugs, allow our communities to breathe for once. Because once these people go to prison for drugs, that's all they know. That's all they know is a hostile environment where everybody has made the same mistakes. And when they get out, they'll make the same mistakes again.
Thank you, Jake. All right, we're going to move on to our next question. I have a question, which is, what is your view about New York State generally and our Assembly District specifically, readiness and plan to distribute the COVID-19 vaccine when the plan comes from the governor? And we'll start with Jake.
Well, I think the government has had a little too much of a hand in this. I think that this is something that would have been better handled by the private sector, but there's a lot of talk of a mandated vaccine. And I 100% oppose a mandated vaccine, along with masks. No government should mandate masks. The founding fathers of this country made it very clear and undebatable that it's not the responsibility of the government to tell people how to get in line, but instead to protect their freedoms from forces working within the government. And it's a shame that New Yorkers are being masked and that businesses are being closed over a silly issue of a mask. Look, I like wearing masks. They make me feel safer. But same as a vaccine. It's my choice to wear one. It's my choice to use a vaccine. New Yorkers own their own bodies, and they have the right to decide what they knowingly and voluntarily do with their own lives.
Okay, and Dan, your response?
Right. I think the question was the ability to distribute a vaccine. And I think that our district, the 121st, would be perfectly capable of doing that. We have some fantastic organizations with many volunteers and many systems for which we can get that vaccine out quickly when it's available. The rest of the time, as Jake talked about, as far as mandates and things, I disagree with him. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I do think that we should not look at this as a silly issue of wearing masks and the preventable ability that they have of spreading this disease. So I don't want to put words in his mouth. I'm sure he'll clarify. But we disagree as far as what the expectations should be when we're in public at the risk that we are all facing with this disease. The vaccines, it would be record time if this came in less than a year. And so if science leads the way and we find a vaccine that is approved with all the protocols that is required of it in that record time, then I would certainly be willing to take it. However, I would not mandate it.
And thank you, Dan. John, your response. Do you need the question? Want me to ask that question again? You got
Would
it.
you please? Sure. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. What is your view about New York State and generally in our assembly district specifically about the readiness and plan to distribute the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, when the plan comes from the governor?
Well, my first question is, what plan? This has been a common denominator through this whole crisis, is the lack of communication from the governor's office and from the Department of Health. I sit on the health committee, and I have gotten no word whatsoever about any plan to distribute a vaccine in the 121st district. Now, I'll make a phone call first thing in the morning to see where it is, but this has been a trend where the amount of information that's coming out of the governor's office, which is coming out of the Department of Health, gets less and less and less. You know, when this whole thing started, we were getting briefed almost on a daily basis. I can't remember the last time we've had any kind of briefing. So the legislature's been kept in the dark on this. Now, I do trust our health departments. I had the honor of serving as the vice president of the Madison County Board of Health for 6 years, and we have a great system in place for distributing vaccines. Working in the health profession, I was through H1N1, the swine flu, Ebola. We were very well prepared for those. I have a high level of professionals in our medical community that I think are up to the task when need be. But the big problem has been how much information is actually coming out of Albany, how much guidance, and it's minimal at this point. So I'm hoping that we get some soon. I'm hoping we get information for our health professionals, for our businesses, for our schools, but right now that is sorely lacking. And if we're going to be prepared to distribute a vaccine, we better make sure it's done right. And we need that guidance from Albany, which is sorely lacking at this point. So I'm waiting for a plan. I trust our locals. I think they need a plan too.
Thank you, John. Jake, did you want to have a follow-up there?
Yes, I do want to clarify. I don't oppose vaccinations. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I don't oppose the use of masks. I oppose the mandating of masks and vaccines. And what's disturbing to me is that, it's like John said, the governor does not communicate. He says this will work. He says this will help, but we don't see the science. He says he knows. The health department knows. Where's the science? At the beginning of this pandemic, we had Dr. Fauci saying that masks don't work, and then suddenly they work. I like wearing a mask. I came to the conclusion that I need to wear a mask independently. I determined the level of risk that I was comfortable with. That's why I wear a mask. But we shouldn't be mandating business. We shouldn't be shutting down businesses because they don't want to force the customers to wear masks. We shouldn't be ticketing people $1,000 because they don't want to wear a mask.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. John, you wanted to follow up?
Just a quick follow-up about how important it is for information. In my 30 plus years as a medical professional, I found that the most important thing that you can do is instill confidence in your patient and in the people that you're trying to heal. And that confidence has to come from a knowledge-based approach on how they can manage their illness, how you can help them manage their illness. Without guidances like that, like we're seeing right now with no guidance coming from the Department of Health, very little, just confused and mixed signals going to our schools and to our departments of health. You can't help people feeling a bit insecure about the information that they're getting. And like Jake said, Dr. Fauci, no mask, then mask, no mask, then mask. Who are we to believe? And that is not a good situation when you're dealing with people's public health.
Oops. Okay, we're going to move on to another COVID question here, which is from Chris Ficken. Do you have any ideas for how to support farms through the pandemic? And we'll start with Dan.
I just want to make sure I heard the question correctly. How to support farms? Is that correct?
Do you have any ideas for how to support farms through the pandemic?
The pandemic. Sure. This is a district with, of its farming community, quite a few of it's in dairy farming. And dairy is suffering right now, in part because of the pandemic and the loss of demand for milk products and the consumption of milk. And so the institutions that normally bought milk for their students, like public schools or even colleges, that has just dropped off, just completely gone almost. And so that has really hurt the farmers. So as far as the near term, it's going to have to be as far as how we can find ways to buy the milk and then give them the support, the liquidity to get through this so we can get back online. The pandemic will not last forever, but we need to get through it in a structured way so that our farms will still be there. And since there is no demand for right now, some of the farm products, the dairy that is for consumption, then now is the time to think as far as what's the future going to be as far as how each farm can succeed once we get past the pandemic. Because the issues with dairy farming have been exposed with the pandemic as far as the difficulty in managing this market. And so the future success of farming in here is how we look at access to markets. And so I have proposed different ideas of how we can do that through value-added services, or also just direct access to markets for farm products in general. And so there's some neat ideas out there. I have proposed, not necessarily my own ideas, but experts in this area that have proposed them that I want to work with. Last year at TEDx, we had Phoebe Schreiner had 7 points that she wanted to focus on that will get New York and the Northeast border into a leadership role in agriculture in the next 30 years. And there's some interesting ideas there as far as where markets are headed and how we can align our farms to meet that demand. And so that's something I'm really excited to work on.
Thank you very much, Dan. And Jake, let me ask that question again. Do you have any ideas for how to support farms through the pandemic?
I do, but before I get into that, I want to make it clear that it wasn't COVID that is hurting farmers. It's not COVID that's hurting farmers. It's government. It's too much restrictions on what they can sell, how they can produce, and who they can sell to. It's the inheritance tax that keeps farmers land rich but money poor. When it comes to this pandemic, we need to start lifting those restrictions. We need to get rid of those taxes. We need to unburden our farmers. We need to make sure that our farmers are able to sell goods without ridiculous government oversight. There's simple things we can do, like allowing the sale of raw meats and raw goods, and going back to a system of a milkman going around every day, dropping milk off at people's houses. There's ways we can do this. We've done this in the past, but the issue isn't COVID. It's our government, and government's got in the way of our farmers. We need to get the government out of the way.
Thank you, Jake. John, do you have any ideas for how to support farms through the pandemic?
Well, one of the ideas that I have, all right, and this takes some legislative effort, is last year, the New York State Legislature passed the Farm Bill. This bill required farms to pay overtime for any work done after 60 hours. And it required farms, which are a unique business in themselves, to start to comply with a lot of rules and regulations. I have a farm in my district in Madison County. It's a good sized farm. They've worked, it's a 3rd generation farm. They work day and night, even the owners, and they employ quite a few people. milk about 3,000 head, and they're losing $2,000 a week just in overtime to make sure that they can produce their product. No matter how big of an operation or how small, you cannot sustain with those kinds of losses. What we did, our minority conference, is we requested to the assembly that we take that farm bill and put an 18-month hold on it so that farmers can operate under very, very difficult circumstances without a bunch of rules and regulations and requirements to pay overtime. Look, the unique characteristics of farming is this. It might be a Sunday afternoon, the rain stopped, you're going to go out and do some field work. According to the farm bill, you have to give that person or their worker a 24 hours continuous off. If not, and you want to call them back in, you're paying them time and a half. We've talked to workers on farms that said, we don't like this bill. We're here to work and to send money home to our families. And now we're being told by our boss that we can't work because they don't want to pay us the overtime. And they're leaving New York State. Good farm workers that have been with these farms for years and years are leaving. So the first thing we need to do, and Jake, I agree, the regulations are horrendous. We need to have an 18-month waiver on the farm bill. It was a bad bill to begin with, and it's making things worse now.
Okay. Thank you, John. And Dan, did you want to do a follow-up?
Yeah, I think that the COVID-19 issue on farms, with the issues that John brought up with the farm bill, that hurt our farms before COVID-19 did on the wage board from the 60 to 40 hours. That is, as he discussed, we're losing labor to other areas, and that's going to hurt our farms aside from the COVID-19. So he proposes the 18-month on the full stop on that farm bill. I think we should look very closely at that 60 to 40-hour wage provision and try to correct that, because that is going to hurt our farms well beyond COVID-19 if that's still in place.
Thank you. Jake, you'd like to follow up as well?
I'll be real quick. If it's not needed in a pandemic, it's not needed ever. That's not something, that's not a bill we should go back and fix. That's a bill that we need to eliminate forever. There shouldn't be restrictions on farmers. We need to leave our farmers alone, let them breathe, let them do what they do best. They care about their community. I know everybody's concerned about the safety of the community. They care about their community. And if it's a bad farm, we won't give them our money. The free market will decide.
Thank you, Jake. John, you want to do, okay, one more.
Just a quick comment here, and I agree with Jake. All right, just as we've seen these bills that come out of the State Assembly and the Senate with all kinds of unintended consequences that are either of the knowledge of the sponsors or not, just like bail reform. Bail reform in concept, great bill for what it wants to do, and now we've seen the horrendous consequences, all right, of what bail reform has resulted in. I have a bill forward, A1-1067, that will repeal bail reform, send it back to the drawing board. Let's make sure no one spends any more time in prison than they should because of their resources. But let's take these laws that have their thumb on the operations of the vital services and the businesses that are in the 121st district and get government off their backs.
Okay, Dan, I'm going to allow another follow-up.
Since John took a bit of a pivot there to talk about bail reform, I want to take a moment to respond to it, even though it may come up later. John's bill that he introduced, I think he knows full well it's not going to get any action this year. And I think it is a bad way to go. Full repeal is not going to happen. Those that voted for it last year are not going to vote to repeal it this year. There have already been amendments taken this year to address some of the issues that were brought up, like in discovery and judicial discretion. There were amendments on that, and that was hard enough for some of those proponents of that bill to vote for, but they did. I offer a different approach. John is offering a full repeal that's going to go nowhere. I want to look at it as an amendment approach to look at the discovery even further, because that may not be enough, and also a restoration of some judicial discretion. These are fixes to the bill. Full repeal is not necessary, and it's not going to happen. And frankly, it's kind of a waste of time to talk about it that way, because it's not going to go that direction. We need to think about how we can fix it first.
So I have to respond to that. Okay, I had a group of law enforcement officers behind me at a press conference who are the frontline workers, who are seeing this revolving door of justice occur every single day, watching criminals with serious charges go back out on the street with nothing but an appearance ticket. So this bill is broken. This bill needs to go back to the drawing board. We need to go back to the true intent, which is fairness in our bail system, and make sure we write a good bill. And here was the problem with that bill. Both the bill and the amendments were incorporated into the budget, were never given the sunlight that they deserved, were never discussed with law enforcement, our district attorneys, our community groups. It was buried in the budget and it was ramrodded through at 4 o'clock in the morning. This is no way to write a bill, and it's no way to institute a law because of that bill.
Okay, Jake, you can follow up.
Thank you. I agree with John. It was a horrendous bill, but I also agree with Dan in the sense that it should be amended, not fully repealed. There are things about the bail reform law that are just horrendous. Nobody should be getting off for a murder. Nobody should be getting off for rape. Nobody should be getting off for assault or theft. I spoke to a police officer here in my hometown of Oneida. She arrested the same woman 5 times for breaking an entry, 5 times within the same week. And that's because of this bill. This bill needs to be amended. This needs to be looked at, but we need to dial this back. We need to bring this back to a big issue. We need to end qualified immunity. I get that we're worried about people getting wrongly convicted, but if we end qualified immunity, we can sue the police officers and the people responsible for abusing their authority on innocent civilians.
You know, I just
All right. Hold on. No, I think we're going to, sorry. No, we're going to stop. Actually, if you'd like, you can address that in your closing statement because we need to move on. Okay. Sorry, John. Thank you. So I have a question here, which is for all the candidates from Roger Bradstreet. What can we expect from each of the candidates on moving to protect citizens? Yes, children too, from semi-automatic or automatic assault weapons. And we'll start with Jake. You're muted, Jake. You're muted.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. There you go.
Hello. I think that's a little of a loaded question. What can we do to protect children from firearms? Well, we can teach children firearm safety. There doesn't need to be any restrictions on the Second Amendment. The founding fathers made it very clear that we may carry and own whatever we can afford. The Second Amendment I believe that no matter who you are, as long as you have a good education with firearms, you should be allowed to carry a firearm. I am for constitutional carry. And I think a lot of the issues with firearms that we're seeing comes from what John was saying before. It's impoverished issues. It's people needing to commit a crime so they can put food on the table for their families. And that comes from drugs. And it's not the use of drugs. It's that drugs are illegal. And if we decriminalize drugs and allowed these things to be like marijuana to be sold in the marketplace, you wouldn't see people fighting over street corners anymore. And there needs to be a cultural shift away from banning guns and more towards education on how to use these tools. Because in this pandemic has showed one thing. It doesn't matter what political party you are. People are going to go get a gun when they're scared, and they have good reason to be. I want to be protected and I want to protect others around me. It doesn't matter what political party you are. You go ask any gun shop owner, he'll tell you left, right, libertarian, independent, Green Party, they're all buying guns because they all feel for their safety. And it's not appropriate for the government to decide who gets to have guns and who doesn't get to have guns. There's a lot of talk about a red flag gun law. That is letting the government have the permission to pick and choose who's allowed to own a firearm. And that's something that I just oppose thoroughly.
All right. Thank you, Jake. John, what can we expect from each of you on moving to protect citizens? Yes, children too, from semi-automatic or automatic assault weapons?
Well, I think you got to look at the core of the question. It's not a matter of protecting them against the gun. It's a matter of protecting them against people who shouldn't have guns. We need to beef up our mental health coverage for people that should not own firearm. Firearms, like Jake said, are readily available to everyone, and training is essential to make sure that firearm is dealt with safely. I'm a firearms owner. I'm a life member of the NRA and the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, we always make sure that if someone has a gun in their hand, they're properly trained. I also have a concealed weapons permit, and you don't pick up that gun without knowing exactly what that gun can do and how to use it. So mental health is probably at the core of how we can address the situation of gun violence. Guns don't pull the trigger by themselves. People pull the trigger, and there are people who should not have their finger on that trigger. We need to have more active resources to be able to recognize those people, provide intervention services, and make sure those people don't get a gun.
Thank you, John. Dan? Let me ask you the question again. What can we expect from each of the candidates on moving to protect citizens, yes, children too, from semi-automatic or automatic assault weapons?
Sure. Well, I want to start by looking at what was already discussed through Jake and John's answers. As far as more than the gun itself, a dangerous person should not have their hands on it. And I think that is achieved through background checks, which we do a pretty good job of in New York. And I support background checks universally. I probably disagree though with my opponents though on the value of red flag laws, because keeping the guns away from those that would hurt others is an important thing to be done. As far as safety with children and guns, the last couple of weeks I've had the privilege of visiting the Milford Game and Fish Club, and I've taken my girls with me. And the first thing they mentioned to me after describing the club and what they do there was the youth programs that they have and how they can provide training for for students, 12 years, I think. And so my girls will be participating in that when they are age ready. And I think that's also an important part is have an understanding of guns, being responsible yourself, and if you don't have a gun in your house, so you know how to handle it. So that's in the three parts there. I support the background checks, I support red flag laws, and I also support education for children to understand the safe handling of guns.
Okay, I'm going to actually not, because we're actually very close to running out of time, and I'd like to get another question in if you don't mind. So the question that we have is, what skills do you have specifically, and what strategies will you use to promote collaborative conversation in the Assembly across partisan lines? So I'm going to start with John.
Everybody has this concept or this belief that when we get down on the floor of the Assembly, you got the left and you got the right, nobody wants to talk. One of the drawbacks to all this new virtual communication that we have is this year we were forced into having virtual sessions, virtual legislative sessions. What that causes, or what that prohibits, I should say, is that interaction that we have on the floor of the Assembly. I'm not able to walk over to some of my colleagues, Democratic and Republican, and discuss the particulars of a bill. We have a bill right now that I'm going to be working with as a sponsorship to Assemblyman Benedetto. Hopefully we'll be able to get it through in the next session that will declare baseball as the state sport. I mean, these are the things that we do. We mill around on the floor of the Assembly. And believe me, there is a lot of camaraderie on the floor of the Assembly. If I have a bill that I want to introduce, or if one of my Democratic Assembly colleagues want to introduce it, we talk to each other about it. We make sure we have the particulars all worked out. There's been many bills that have been proposed by my Democratic colleagues that I've supported. And the reason why I support it is because it's good for my district. It doesn't matter if it comes from a Republican or if it comes from a Democrat or it comes from a Libertarian. If it's a good bill, we're going to back it up. We're going to vote for it. We have vigorous debates. Sometimes they get heated. Most of the time, they're very respectful. But the communication on the floor of the Assembly is there, and it's profound at times. And I'm proud to be able to say that I have worked with my Democratic colleagues on bills that I knew were not only going to help the 121st District, we're going to help all citizens, all residents of the state of New York. So the communication is there. It's nice to think that we're always going at each other's throats. I've had beers with these people on the other side, dinners. They've been in my office. It's there.
Thank you, John. Jake? What skills do you have specifically, and what strategies will you use to promote collaborative conversation in the Assembly across partisan lines?
Well, the wonderful part about this is that I'm a libertarian. I'm an economic conservative and I am a social progressive. So there's nobody who's better poised to speak to the Republican parties on issues of reform and Medicaid and the Second Amendment. And there's no better candidate to speak to the Democratic Party on issues of bail reform and the qualified immunity and legalization of marijuana. And as a 24-year-old business owner and father of 3 children who are trying to survive in a state with one of the worst economies and highest tax rates in the country, who better can tell you what government policies and what programs are hindering the success of an average working family? Because I deal with that on a day-to-day basis. A lot of the people I speak to are my age and older. They're business owners. They're people who are trying to get their foot in the door. They're people who are carrying a lifetime of debt from college. And that's the experience I bring. I am a normal working everyday guy. I bring that to the table, and I want to be heard, and I want to make sure that the people of the 121st district are heard.
Thank you very much, Jake. And Dan, what skills do you have specifically, and what strategies will you use to promote collaborative conversation in the assembly across partisan lines?
Sure. I'd like to start by going over a story from my experience on the planning board. I had just joined the planning board, and there was a controversial decision that we had to make. And it was about a site plan in the town of Oneonta, and there was some opposition in the room. It was not a clear-cut decision. And I ultimately voted against what a person had spoken up quite loudly about the issue. I voted against what she had wanted me to do. But afterwards, since I knew that she had a different perspective on it and a long-standing history with the issue at hand, I went to talk to her after the meeting, and she was more than welcome to share with me her points of view and how she had developed it. It was certainly a reasonable point of view. My decision was more in the short term, not necessarily reflective of her past experience. And afterwards, I learned a lot from that moment from her. And I was talking to my dad about it, and he said something that really crystallized for me. He said, the best thing you did that night was go and talk to the opposition, the person that was opposing your point of view, because it did a couple things. One, you learned, and second, it showed others that you were willing to listen. And I think that's an important skill set that I offer. Listening, I think, is a skill set. Being able to adjust your point of view based on new information. And so since then, I have sought feedback on all of my ideas. And I think the thing that I am willing to do that is to take my ideas, put them out there, accept feedback, and maybe adjust them. And I think that is evident, like I said before at the beginning, through the TEDx program. The TEDx program does not look anything at all like I thought it would, but it's so much better because I brought other people into the fold. And that team that made that work is made up of Democrats, Republicans, Independent. Everyone has a different perspective, and it's wonderful to see what you can do when you come together working on a common goal. So I think, as we said before, teamwork, seeking feedback, listening are skill sets and strengths that I offer that I think will be very valuable in this position and serve us well in the 121st.
Thank you, Dan. So, so in the past, so far, what we've talked about, if I can just summarize the topics, we talked about. There was a question about funding for the Catskill Regional Teacher Center, improving broadband, and voter registration questions and election questions, gerrymandering, working toward unity during the protests, the COVID vaccine and pandemic, and supporting farms through that, and protection from assault weapons and semi-automatic weapons, as well as bail reform. And then finally, promoting collaborative conversation across partisan lines. So now what I'd like to do is ask for a 2-minute closing statement from each candidate. And the order of the closing statements was also determined by a draw. So I'd like to start with the closing statement from Jake Cornell.
Thank you. And we're here at the end of the debate. We made it through. So I'd like to thank John and Dan for their discussion. I think we learned a lot about what each other agree on and what we disagree on. And it's a shame that we can't have this face-to-face, because I really do appreciate face-to-face conversations. But look, we have problems here in New York. We have education problems. We have a problem with the cost of living. We have a problem of being very unappealing for employers to move into the state. And we have a problem of hundreds of thousands of residents leaving because of these reasons. We have a problem of disproportionate power in the governor's office. in, in a little city down on Long Island that controls every aspect of our lives up here in New York State. Makes no mistake about that. And things will continue to spiral out of control and get worse if we don't dramatically shrink the size of our state government immediately. And we can't do that unless there's not a voice in Albany who won't be the squeaky wheel, as John said.
Thank you very much, Jake. And now the closing statement from John Salka.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity to present who I am as a candidate and who I'm going to be as your next and the same New York State Assemblyman. I have a phrase, and what it is keeping a steady hand at the helm of the 121st. The background that I've been able to have over the past 22 years of public service and my years in medicine and my time in education, running my own small business, working in factories. I've been there on the front line on a number of things that I think give me a good level of experience and perspective on how to guide the 121st through some very, very difficult times. My background in health, my position on the health committee, my position as a member of the aging committee give me an insider's information, if you will, on how we can better plan this challenge that we have called COVID. I know we're going to be able to get through this. I know we can because we're going to maintain that strong leadership in the 121st district. We're going to give people the guidance that they need. We're going to allow them to open back up again for our businesses. We're going to get our children back to school and get them back to school safely. We're going to get through this deficit that we have of over $16 billion. That takes experience. Those are the kind of issues that I am acquainted with. I've had as challenges before in my profession and in my life. And I would hope that the people of the 121st district have seen how hard we have worked for them and give me another 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And now the closing statement from Dan Buttermann.
I'd like to start by also expressing my thanks to the League for making this event happen. I think, as I said at the beginning, there are distinctions between us. There are differences of opinion, a difference of approaches. At the bottom of all this, though, the future doesn't belong to any one of us. It belongs to our children. I am running for the future of New York, for my children and the world that they're going to be entering as they grow up. And I am concerned about the future, but also equally optimistic because there are some exciting things ahead of us. And of course, we couldn't cover all the topics tonight. There's exciting things about renewable energy that's going to completely shift our energy needs. It's going to provide lower cost energy, protect our environment, and create an amazing amount of jobs. We're the fastest growing job industries in the country. There's things we could do for education to empower our schools. We are very fortunate to have a network of small schools, but Albany isn't treating us the way that I think it could. There are some adjustments we can do there. And also on incentivizing jobs. We didn't get too much of that tonight, but I want to focus on how we can get through the pandemic, make sure the businesses that are already here can stay open and reopen, but how are we going to go a step further? How are we going to bring more businesses to this area? And at the same time, incentivize entrepreneurship. Those are important conversations and important goals that we need to be having as a district. And I think with my experience through a small business, Cornell manufacturing, through music, an MBA from one of the best schools in the country, working in insurance, community service from school board to bringing big ideas to its head, I've got the experience, the qualifications to do this job and do it well. We need an advocate. We need someone who listens and brings ideas that are ready to take action and builds the collaborative approach to do it, the productive relationships that are required for any idea to come to life. And I'm very excited about this opportunity. So please go to buttermanforassembly.com to learn more. Send me an email, give me a call. There's lots of ways to find me. I'm looking forward to serving this district. Thank you.
Okay, well, I want to thank all the candidates. Thank you to John Salka, Jacob Cornell, and Dan Buttermann, and my fellow league members working behind the scenes to make this possible, and to the audience for making this a really valuable, informative, and engaging event. I'm going to do one last screen share here for all of you. So one moment, please. Okay, so basically this is the contact information for the different candidates. So Dan Buttermann, as he said, it's buttermannforassembly.com. We've got Jacob Cornell at jakecornell.net and John Salka at salkaforassembly.com. And if you have questions about, if you want to get a hold of the League of Women Voters of Oneonta area, that's lwvoneonta.org. The League of Women Voters of the Cooperstown area, lwvcooperstownarea.org. And then any election information, we also highly recommend vote411.org. You'll basically be able to find like an election guide that's cured specifically for you to find out. It'll have all the information you need, not only about where to vote and who to contact about voting, but also specifically what your candidates have to say about the various issues that are at hand. So I think that's about it. So I'm going to leave this up for just a little bit longer. And I want to thank, again, all the candidates, and I really appreciate it. And please get out there and vote. Thank you so much, and have a good night.